Hi, folks. It's Douglas Cochrane here. I thought some of you might be interested in hearing another story about the infamous Grandpa Cochrane. He was quite a fella in his day, and I thought I'd tell you about another one of his adventures. But before I start, I want to mention that a fellow I know well, expert in internet and YouTube production, informs me that the average viewer has an attention span that's about 3 to 5 minutes long. And he said if you have a any YouTube that's longer than 3 to 5 minutes, people aren't going to watch it. So sometimes I've had my stories have run a little bit longer than that, and so I'm a little concerned about that. So I'll make sure this time that we stick strictly within those guidelines. So let's get on with the story quickly so that we can get done. Now, this story takes place in Wisconsin. That's where Grandpa Cochrane grew up, and it's about mosquitoes. So there's half of our time almost gone already, so I've got to hurry on. So when Grandpa Cochrane was a young man, he was maybe 20, 21 years old at the time of this event, and both his parents were gone by that point. He was living in a bunkhouse on the farm of his best friend Doug Robertson, my godfather, and he was doing whatever he could to get by. It was the middle of the Great Depression. Jobs were really hard to come by, and nobody had much money, so he was doing what he could to get by. And at the time this story starts, his net assets in the world consisted of half of an old horse that he and Doug Robertson had traded for somehow, and he had 2 sacks of potatoes and 39 cents. And he met this farmer. He went to this farmer's place and said, "Sir, do you have any work?" And the guy took pity on him. He was a nice young man, and he said, "Well, tell you what," he says, I'll pay you $1 a day to clean out my barn if you'll work hard." And Grandpa Cochrane said, "No problem there. I am a hard worker." So he went to work cleaning out the guy's barn, and boy, it was a mess. It hadn't been cleaned for quite a while, and he was working away, and back in one of the back stalls, he found this old wrecked Model A Ford, and it was all covered with straw and dust and stuff, but he was cleaning things out, and when the farmer came around, he said to the farmer, he says, "What's with that old Ford?" And the farmer said, "Oh, it don't run." And he said, "Well," he said, would you have any interest in getting rid of it?" And the farmer said, "Yeah, I'd consider an offer." And at that point, Grandpa Cochrane was about done with the job, and he had been working for 2 days, so his net assets now consisted of half a horse, 2 sacks of potatoes, and $2.39. And so he made a tough bargain with the farmer. After considerable negotiation, he gave the farmer the horse and a sack of potatoes in exchange for this old busted down wrecked Ford Model A. So the farmer agreed, and so Grandpa Cochrane brought his horse around and pulled the old Model A out. He had to air up the tires to get it to roll. He rolled it out to the barnyard and hooked up to it and hauled it up to the farm where Doug Robertson's family lived. And when he came back with the horse and the sack of potatoes, he gave the farmer the sack of potatoes, and just about that time the horse laid down and died. So the farmer looked at him and said, "Well," he says, I guess I traded you a dead car and I got a dead horse in exchange, but I came out of it with a sack of potatoes and a clean barn, so I guess that's fair is fair." And so Grandpa Cochrane said, "Okay, well then that's fair by me." And he went home and explained to Doug Robertson that sadly the horse was no bueno, and offered Doug the other sack of potatoes in exchange for his half of the horse. And Doug said, "Don't worry about it." He said that horse was on its last legs, literally. So over the next week or so, a couple of weeks, Grandpa Cochrane pulled the engine out of that old car. He didn't actually pull it out. He just took the heads and the pan off. He swapped the other sack of potatoes and his $2 with the local mechanic, and got a set of rings and bearings, and he honed out the cylinders and lapped the valves and cleaned out the carburetor. And there was a family of spiders had taken up housekeeping there, and he chased all the mice out of the upholstery, and he got the thing to run. So being a young man, he slapped a coat of bright yellow paint on it. He tore off the wrecked part of the back end and made this kind of a box out of it, so it was kind of a pickup truck looking thing that was bright yellow, and he named it the Bustle Buggy, and that was his claim to fame. Now he had 39 cents and a sack of potatoes and a Bustle Buggy. And so then he had to figure out some way to make some money, but he had better assets now because he had a car that would run. So he goes to this local blacksmith, this guy named Tom, nice young fellow that did really nice work. And he says to Tom, he says, how's business? And he says, well, business isn't good. He says, I can make more iron stuff than I can sell. And so Grandpa Cochrane said, well, how'd you like to sell me a truckload of what you got? And the guy says, well, what do you have in mind? And he says, well, whatever a farmer would buy, everything from a soup can to a ladle to up to a kettle or machetes. So Tom says, yeah, I got quite a bit of stock. So they agreed on a price, and then Grandpa Cochrane said, no, there's only one problem with this. I said, I don't have any money. So if you'll just give me a week or two, I'll pay you then. And Tom looked him in the eye and said, you look like an honest young guy, and I can see you got a lot of hustle. We'll do it. So Grandpa Cochrane started driving around the countryside with this load of ironwork, and he'd pull into these farms and say, hey, you need anything? I got knives, I got scissors, I got everything you need. I got a washboard, I got a big kettle, and sometimes they'd buy stuff, or sometimes he'd trade for stuff, and he was getting along. He made enough to pay Tom back, and got another load of iron, and went out and did it again, and so he was making a regular business of this, and getting to know the countryside as well. People knew him and were anxious for him to come around. So sometimes he would. If he was in town, he could sometimes, if he was doing well, he could even rent a room and buy a meal. And other times, one of the farmers would say, "Well, come on, you can sleep in my barn," and maybe the farmer's daughter would bring him out a sandwich or something like that, and they could have a little, slap and a tickle in the barn and lay in the hay mow for a little while. So he was getting along all right. He's doing fine. But sometimes, come nightfall, he wouldn't be close to any farms or any towns or anything, so he'd just have to sleep rough. And so this particular story is about one of those nights. He was driving along and had a good day, and he realized he wasn't going to get any place to stay, so he started looking around and found a nice place where he could pull off of the little country road, and there was a kind of a meadow there, and he went and laid out his blanket, and he had a little bite to eat with him, and was getting ready for bed when these two mosquitoes come along. Now in Wisconsin, they don't have mosquitoes like we have here out in the West Coast. I mean, out here in the West Coast, the mosquitoes can get a little ferocious, but they're not very big. But out in Wisconsin, they got big guys. I mean, they get real hefty mosquitoes out there in Wisconsin. And so these two mosquitoes, now one of them was kind of undersized. It was probably the littlest mosquito in the county. It was only about the size of a chickadee, just a little, little guy about like this. But the big one was quite a bit bigger, and they're looking at Grandpa Cochrane and saying, "Oh man, there's dinner." Yeah, this guy, he looks pretty tasty. We're going to land on him, but then they thought, well, we might need some help on this one. He's a little bigger than we are, so the bigger mosquito says to the little one, he says, "You keep an eye on this guy, and I'll run back to the nest and get some help. I'll go get our brothers and our cousins and stuff, and we'll come and have a feast tonight." So he goes buzzing off to the nest, and the other little one keeps buzzing around, and Grandpa Cochrane gives the swat at it, and tries to get rid of the thing, and it won't go away. So he realizes it's going to be a long night, especially if that other mosquito comes back and maybe some more. It could be a long night. So he's trying to think of what he could do to get by, and then he has this bright idea. So he runs back out to the bustle buggy, and he had this great big pot that he had. And what people did in those days, this before they had washing machines and stuff, they didn't even have electricity, most farms, and so the farmer's wife would have a great big pot, and on Mondays she would build a fire out in the yard and put this big pot on it full of water, and when it got good and hot, then she'd throw all the dirty clothes in it, and she'd use a big stick and punch it up and down, with some soap, and then she'd dump that out and get some fresh water and rinse everything, and then she'd hang it all on a line. And that's how you did laundry in those days. And a lot harder work than it is these days. So he had this great big pot. So he got the big pot, and he carries it out to the middle of the meadow where his blankets and stuff were. And then he runs back to the bustle buggy, and he had a little tiny hammer, a little tack hammer. Tack hammers. See, in those days when you put down a carpet, you didn't have, the rubber, the non-skid or something to go on. So you'd tack down the corners all the way around the edges of your carpet. You tack it down with these little tiny tacks, and so you had a little tiny tack hammer to put them in with. So he brings this tack hammer out. He's got the big pot, and he puts all his blankets and stuff inside of the pot, and he puts a little hammer, and then he tips the pot over, and he crawls underneath of it. So he's sitting in the pot, kind of crunched down like this with his little hammer, and he can hear this little mosquito out there going, trying to figure out what he's doing. What's that man, crazy guy doing? He's hiding in this pot. And so about that time, here comes the bigger mosquito, and he brought all the big brothers. And I mean, some of those guys, they're big guys, they're and they go to the little guy. Where's the guy? And he goes, he's in the pot here. He's in that pot. And they're buzzing around trying to figure out how to get to him. They can smell him. They know he's in there, but they can't get at him. So finally, one of the big brothers gets so angry, he goes, bzz, 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 and he goes way up high, bzz, and he zooms down, bzz, pong, and he sticks his stinger right in the pot, and he sticks it clear through the pot. And he's going, and Grandpa Cochrane takes his little tiny hammer, and he goes, bing, 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 and he bends his stinger over, and the guy's stuck, and he's going, can't get loose. So one of the other mosquitoes goes, he goes, ding, and he sticks in the pot, and Grandpa Cochrane goes, ding, 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 and bends that one over, and they all get so angry. These mosquitoes are all, and they're bing, bing, bing. Grandpa Cochrane's bing, 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 fast as he can. He's bending their little stingers over, and there's all these mosquitoes are stuck in this pot. More and more and more, and they keep coming. The pot is just. Finally, they had so many mosquitoes there, and they had to call in their friends from the next hive over, and they all come, and they are all just dozens of them. Bing, 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 bing. Grandpa Cochrane, bing, 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 every place. Finally, every single mosquito in the county was stuck on that pot except for the littlest one. That little one, he was scared, and they're saying, come on, help us. Come on, you can help us. And finally he gets his courage up and he goes, Grandpa Cochrane goes, ding, 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 ding. And the pot had so many mosquitoes on it. It's unbelievable how many mosquitoes there were on it. It was vibrating, and they all get angrier, and they fly as hard as they can, and they actually lift the pot up in the air. And they carry it off in the distance. And it was all very quiet in the meadow. And Grandpa Cochrane spread out his blankets and went to sleep. Had a very nice sleep. And that's the story of Grandpa Cochrane and the mosquitoes. See you again.